Let me ask you all a question. If one were to be raised in an environment surrounded by nothing other than drugs, murder and unforgiveness, could one be blamed for making a living out of nothing other than drugs, murder and unforgiveness? Okay, now I just want to quickly go over how today's video is going to be structured, as the majority of Wire fans are under the impression that Snoop is nothing more than just a one-dimensional murdering psychopath, hence the very few video essays about her online, and I believe this stems from a lack of a backstory the show gives on her, as what a lot of Wire fans fail to understand is that unlike the majority of characters in the show, Snoop wasn't a character created by David Simon, but rather a character discovered by David Simon. And what I mean by this is that the fictional character of Snoop Pearson is actually based on the real life Felicia Snoop Pearson, meaning all of Snoop's motivations, character quirks and whatever else are to an extent all just traits of the real life Snoop Pearson. So essentially, what I'm going to do in this video is take an in-depth look at Snoop's real life backstory and then attempt to answer the question posed at the beginning of this essay. As stated in many of my previous videos, evil isn't necessarily the act itself, but rather the motivations behind it. Is Snoop doing what she's doing out of free will? Or does she simply not know any better? Or is there perhaps an external force almost forcing her into committing the evil act she commits, without her even knowing it? Felicia Snoop Pearson was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and was the daughter of two incarcerated drug addicts. She was raised in an East Baltimore foster home, and according to her memoir, only met her biological parents a handful of times. At the age of 14, Snoop was convicted of second-degree murder. However, by the time she was 18, Pearson claims to have turned her life around when a local drug dealer who looked out for her was shot and killed. Snoop was later released from prison in the year 2000 and landed a local job fabricating car bumpers. However, was fired just 2 weeks later as her employer had found out about a criminal record.
Take that top bunk over there.
Raised in an East Baltimore foster home, it's highly likely that Snoop would have had to undergo the same necessary transformation that Randy would have had to undergo during Season 5. Weak to strong, or peaceful to violent. Now this is because foster homes in Baltimore are environments very similar to that of jails, as the children who inhabit these places are children raised in a system that does so little to protect them and help them stray away from a life of crime. And what you'll notice a lot in the show is that the children of Baltimore tend to be far more mature than those anywhere else, as to an extent they're left with no other choice, as a child like Snoop, with no positive role models or parents to look after her, need to mature at a far younger age than most children in order to survive, with the foster home more than likely being the place where Snoop's childlike innocence was stripped in its entirety. And if you're surrounded by drugs and crime all the time, then surely your only option of survival and making money has got to be through what you know, which unfortunately for Snoop, just happens to be drugs and crime. Now, because of Snoop's tough upbringing, she often found herself surrounded by people very attracted to crime and violence, and because at this time in her life Snoop was only 14, like many of us at that age, we were very intrigued by the idea of two people fighting, as one, our curiosity as a child is naturally spiked, watching something that we only ever see in the movies happen right before our eyes. And two, is because children like to imitate behaviour, especially in an environment where only the strong prevail. We want to see what being strong really looks like. However, the difference between us watching a fight and Snoop watching a fight is the environment it's taking place in. The odds of somebody pulling out a weapon in the playground and things going south isn't as likely to occur as it is in East Baltimore. And unfortunately for Snoop, one day she found herself in a situation where she felt like she had no other choice but to take another person's life in order to save her own.
Ain't nothing. I can handle that, fool. You ain't have to step two.
Oh, shit, no. You had everything under control. Look at your face. Of course, I recognize the other boy was high as all hell, and anything can jump off when it's like that, you know?
Yeah, and he would have been on his ass if you ain't mixed in. I can.
Now, there are actually several reasons as to why Snoop committed this murder, and in a moment, I'll highlight the importance behind bringing this up. The most important factors we have to look at in and around Snoop's first murder are her emotional state. Did she do what she did because she was angry at the world? Self-preservation. Did she do what she did because she felt like her own life was in danger? And her reaction. How did she feel after taking another person's life? See, Snoop is under the belief that she shouldn't care about herself or anybody else in this world if her mother and father didn't care about her, which at the age of 14 is a tragic yet logical outlook to have on the world, as at this age, or to an extent any age prior to you having your own children, if the people who brought you into this world don't care about you, then why care yourself? You're here on accident, nobody intended for you to be here, so why care about life or death? Now naturally, one would deem an individual who lacks any sort of emotion towards the murder of another human being to be a psychopath. However, in the case of Snoop, her reasoning for reacting the way she does isn't as cut and dry as it just being a part of her psyche, but rather she reacts the way she does because of how she views her own existence. It's as simple as her not caring about her own life, so why care about the lives of others? She understands both how the game is played, and would expect nothing less than for her killer to be merciless when killing her. In a way, Snoop is a very honourable character in comparison to a lot of the others on the show. She understands that what she's doing is despicable, and therefore doesn't deserve to plead or moan when the same violence is eventually extracted onto her.
How my hair look, Mike?
You look good, girl.
Snoop is a character with a lot of pent-up anger inside of her, and I'll explore this point in more detail later on in the video. But in relation to the first murder she commits, from the stories we've been told, anger doesn't really seem to be the most important factor. It doesn't seem like she did what she did in the hopes of releasing some of that negativity stored inside of her. It's instead painted out to be more of a point to prove type murder, where Snoop perhaps saw an opportunity to cement herself as somebody not to be messed with. Again, relating back to that survival of the fittest, the need to become the strongest. See, children often try to involve themselves in drama that doesn't really have anything to do with them. They yearn a desire for inclusion. They don't want to be left out. And some, especially those who have felt alone their entire life, see an opportunity to be noticed. And what better way to get that than to pit yourself in the centre of the loudest crowd? However, when we grow up and gradually become more intelligent as adults, we often distance ourselves from the drama that has nothing to do with us, as we understand both the consequences that can arise when being around a particular scenario, and that we also just simply don't care. We've seen these fights play out over a dozen times, and therefore it simply isn't interesting anymore. Yes, murdering this woman was an evil act. However, if we take into account all of these human factors, the need to become the strongest, the lack of care regarding her own existence, a broader picture is painted. This murder and many others aren't as one-dimensional as people are making them out to be. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this murder in particular over any other Snoop commits on the show is because often a character's first murder is by far their most significant. It's the backbone they use to justify all the other murders they'll go on to commit. Take for example Walter White and his first murder. He does what he does as he convinces himself that his family's life will be in danger if he doesn't murder Crazy 8, which going forward is a justification he uses for the majority, if not all of the murders he goes on to commit, and only ever is, say, the murder of a child, far more significant or important. As if a character can justify murdering one person, they can sure as hell use that same justification to murder another 2 or 3. Now this is a perfect example of a murder worth analysing, or should I say reaction to a murder, as the way Snoop reacted here was far from characteristic. However, the reason for her reacting the way she did isn't what many Wire fans claim it to be. Snoop wasn't horrified at how Chris brutally murdered this man, but was actually envious of what Chris did for Michael. Now, in order for us to understand what I mean by this, we first have to understand Snoop and Chris's relationship. See, Snoop views Chris as a sort of role model, a father figure to some extent. However, when she notices Chris giving all of his attention to Michael, Snoop starts to become jealous, to become envious. She views Michael as hostile, somebody who's come into her world and is encroaching into her territory. Hence why Snoop gets so angry when Michael rejects Chris's praise, as to her it means so much, whereas to Michael it means so little. And when the man who has been so calm and collected the entire time the two have been working together eventually loses it, it only makes sense for her to become envious, for her to want to be the reason why Chris loses it. How can a man so emotionless and precise lose it for somebody he's only known for a fraction of the time he's known Snoop? So no, Snoop isn't horrified of how brutal this murder is, but rather she's horrified at how easy Chris is able to lose it over somebody hurting Michael. I finally just want to make a call back to the point mentioned earlier regarding Snoop and all of the pent up anger, because it's going to help in understanding why she's so subservient to people like Marlo and all the orders that he makes. Now, as you might remember from the start of the video, I mentioned Snoop getting a job after she was released from prison, and then being fired from said job a couple of weeks later, as her employer had found out about a criminal record. Now this is where the Snoop in the show, and the Snoop we see in real life, start to deviate drastically, as Snoop's reaction to this in real life was to simply move on, eventually finding herself crossing paths with Michael K. Williams, and becoming an actress. However, the Snoop we know in the show, her reaction to this news isn't so great, and all we're left with is to assume that this is the moment where Snoop became the cold-blooded killer we all know in the show. Felicia Pearson is essentially just playing herself in a setting where from this very moment, things didn't go so well. See, in order for somebody to rid themselves of all of the anger built up inside of them, they need something tangible to take that anger out on, because otherwise it's just going to keep on building and building until boom, you explode. And Marlo, being the smart chess player that he is, notices this. He notices that Snoop is an individual just waiting to explode, so what he does isn't necessarily take advantage or exploit Snoop, as she is an adult with her own free will, but rather he gives her the opportunity to release some of that anger, which is targets for Snoop to take all of that pent up anger out on. And this is why in many scenes you'll see Snoop eagerly waiting to be put on another mission, because for her, murder is to an extent relieving, and this is why she stays so loyal to Marlo, as so long as he's around and giving her targets, she's always going to be able to release some of that stored up anger, which has been brewing for years. Snoop also feels as if she has a purpose when working under Marlo. Her existence is now benefiting others. She's needed, and to an extent she's wanted. I say this very lightly, as when she was killed off on the show nobody really seemed to care that much, but then again she was surrounded by the most ruthless criminals on the show, so maybe if she worked under somebody like Avon, there'd have been a little more of a reaction to her being killed. In relation to the question asked at the beginning of the video, the answer is yes. Snoop should be held accountable and blamed for her actions, as regardless of the reasons given in this video, Snoop at the end of the day is still an adult with her own free will, and could have quite easily taken a different path in life after being fired from her job, similar to how she went about it in real life. However, that isn't to say Snoop is an entirely evil and unforgivable murderer, because she's not. There is very plausible reasoning for her acting the way she does. Snoop grew up in an environment far harsher than any of us could ever imagine, and therefore labelling her as a one-dimensional murdering psychopath just isn't logical. Is Snoop evil? Yes. Does she fall under the category of absolute evil? No. Was she exploited? No. Anyway, I just want to thank you all so much for watching. I'm really sorry for this extremely late upload. I had written the script about 3 weeks ago. However, my hard drive became corrupted, and because I'm stupid and don't bother to back up any of my folders, I lost the script. And to be honest, I lack the motivation to rewrite it all again. So, you know. But it's here now. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.